What's up, guys? Welcome back to Jimmy Talk. So let's talk about libertarianism a little bit. On the surface, it sounds appealing, everything that they say, because they're talking about freedom and the Constitution, and taxation is theft, and everybody hates the IRS. You know, every time taxes, that kind of time in the season comes around, I fucking hate it. And I think everybody can also agree that the federal government is very bloated and it's just strangling this country. But when you actually look at libertarianism, we don't find allies as right wingers. It's kind of just as destructive to the American nation and the Christian faith and our European heritage as anything coming out of the progressive left. In fact, in many ways, libertarians are just the useful idiots for the liberal regime. They are wolves in sheep's clothing who open the gates for the very tyranny that they claim to oppose, and I will tell you why. And before I even start, there's like 10% of libertarians that I like. The other 90% are just libtards in disguise. But anyways, the fundamental problem with libertarianism is that it treats human beings like interchangeable economic units, rather than spiritual beings with a culture and a history and a nature that requires order. So I'm pretty much going to be attacking libertarianism, and I fully expect to get some heat for this, but it is what it is. So I think that libertarians, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, operate on this childish notion that liberty is the only value that matters. But I'm going to be totally honest with you. Letting people do whatever they want is not civilization. It's really stupid. Liberty without morality is just degeneracy. And that is the key facet that libertarians fail to grasp. When this country started, we had immense freedom. We had so much. We had liberty. But at the same time, 99% of the population was Christian. The cultural baseline was a shared European heritage with a shared moral framework. The founding fathers didn't create a government for a chaotic, atomized mob of atheistic consumers. Like, get excited for the next product so I can consume. John Adams also said this very plainly. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Hey, come on, he said it himself. But libertarians read the Constitution like it's a suicide pact. They ignore the moral and religious part and just focus on the freedom part. But you cannot have one without the other. If you give absolute freedom to a population that has no moral compass, you do not get a free society. You get an insane jungle. You get chaos. And eventually people will beg for a tyrant just to restore some semblance of order. You can disagree all you want, but that's just a fact. Take the drug issue. All right? Let's talk about the libertarians' POV on drugs. This is where the libertarian brain rot is the most obvious, because they want to decriminalize everything. And I'm not talking about marijuana, weed, there's an argument to be made there. I'm not even totally against weed. I don't like it personally, but there's an argument to be made for a legitimate medical use, like purpose. I don't like when people use it recreationally either, but let's be totally honest, it's not as damaging as like crack, okay? But it's stuff like meth and fentanyl and heroin. The libertarian argument is always, well, it's their body, buddy. It's their choice. If they die, it's just a Darwin Award. And that is an absolutely retarded way to run a society. Let me ask you this. What is the purpose of the state? What is the purpose of a government if it cannot do something as simple as keeping poison out of the hands of its own citizens? We are not isolated atoms floating in a void. That is not what humans are. We are a community. A junkie, for example, shooting up in a park is not just exercising his liberty or something. He is a blight on the neighborhood. He is a danger to children. He is a drain on the resources of the productive citizens. Now, I'm not calling for a return to the 1990s style war on drugs or what have you. But it is basic common sense. It's logic 101, actually, that you keep drugs made in some guy's bathtub or a sketchy lab in China or Mexico illegal. You use the law as a deterrent. You don't just shrug your shoulders and say, no, live and let live, Darwin Award. Because the inevitable result of the libertarian policy isn't just people doing what they want, it's state subsidized suicide. So look at what happens when these policies get enacted that they are so in supportive of. You don't get a free market of drugs if you were to just legalize everything. What they want is something called safe injection sites. I argued with this guy before. I think it was on Discord. This was years ago. I wasn't even doing YouTube. I don't even really remember who he was or what it was. I just remember this conversation. But anyways, he said we need to have safe injection sites. He wanted everyone, like the taxpayer, to pay for basically overdose facilities. I've had libertarians seriously argue that this is a good solution. It's places where junkies can go, shoot up safely, and if they overdose, a medical professional paid for by your tax dollars hits them with Narcan so they can wake up and do it again tomorrow. Do people seriously think that's a good idea to have in a neighborhood, near a school? You think free junkie centers are the hallmark of a high trust society? No, absolutely not. People are not incentivized to get clean when you give them a padded room to do drugs and just destroy themselves. That is not liberty. That is just the state aiding and abetting the destruction of its own people. That's absolutely fucking insane to me. Now, libertarian economics. Let's move on to that. Libertarians worship the free market like it's a god. In a vacuum, sure. I'll give them that. The idea sounds nice. In a small and demographically stable, high-trust country, a free market is great, actually. But we don't live in that. We don't live in a perfect textbook. We live in modern America. A totally free market in a country like this never works out the way that they promise it would. Basically, it always ends in one of two ways. Either the government and the corporations collude together through backroom deals and lobbying to crush the little guy, like small family businesses in Main Street, and it ends up being all about Wall Street instead, or the market gets so insane that one massive monopoly ends up running the whole entire country anyways. So the fact of the matter is we need regulations. Not the shitty, excessive red tape that we have now. Of course, there's an argument to be made there. There's nuance to everything, right? But regulations to prevent slave labor factories from undercutting American workers and importing H-1Bs and to prevent distinct moral hazards is kind of needed, But ultimately, it comes down to a deeper rot, and that is the banking system. Now on this, I actually agree with libertarians on the diagnosis big time. Like, we need sound money. I'm all about precious metals. I'm always talking about it, especially if you follow me on Twitter, you know I am. We need to return to precious metals. The Federal Reserve is a criminal organization. Totally agree. But the libertarian solution of just let the banks do whatever doesn't work in a fiat-based debt economy. The banks don't operate on equity anymore. They operate on debt. That is how the whole country works. That's the American economy. It's all ran off of debt with fake paper money. So the banks don't take a hit if they invest into something and the company fails. They don't care. They throw out loans to anyone who wants them, like student loans, mortgages, business loans. Literally any retard ever can get a loan. It's kind of crazy. But they will collect interest off the backs of these people. It doesn't matter how stupid someone is. They can get a loan anyways. That is how banks make their money. So this basically encourages a never-ending debt cycle that enslaves the population. This system does not benefit the small business on Main Street. It benefits the massive conglomerate companies on Wall Street. The banks want to work with the massive companies because it's efficient. They want to work in tandem with the government, and we saw this in 2008. The banks failed in real estate crash. Did the free market punish them, though? No, the U.S. government stepped in and bailed them out because these companies were just too big to fail. That is the reality of the system we live in. Libertarians will say, though, that wasn't real capitalism, but that doesn't matter. That is the reality of power. You cannot separate economic power from political power. We need an economic system that favors the small family business and the farmer and just the local guy, and we need to crush the big banking cartel, not give them more freedom to give predatory loans to the American middle class to destroy it into oblivion. Now, this leads us to the issue of borders and the nation itself. This is the biggest rift between myself and libertarians because libertarians believe in magic dirt theory. They believe that America is just a piece of land with some lines on a map, and that anyone who steps across those lines becomes an American with their new piece of paper. They believe in the idea of a propositional nation, like Vivek Ramaswamy would tell you, that as long as you sign a piece of paper and you pay your taxes, you're just as American as a descendant of the Mayflower. And that is a lie. Demographics are destiny. People have gotten on my ass about this, and Jimmy, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. That it's just a fact of the matter. Don't hate me. I don't make the rules here, right? Culture is not some abstract concept that's floating in the ether land. It is the biological and historical identity of a specific people. Libertarians refuse to acknowledge that high trust societies like the one America used to be are actually pretty rare. They are also fragile. They are the result of centuries of shared religion, shared blood, and a shared struggle, a shared identity. So when libertarians advocate for open borders because they want the free movement of labor, it's all about economy and materialism to them. They are advocating for the permanent destruction of the right. They will look at a Somalian who got here yesterday and a man whose family fought in the Revolutionary War, and they see two identical economic units. Oh yeah, that Somalian who got here yesterday, yeah, he should have a gun too. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? But back to the economy part, they're just kind of blind to reality. Third world immigrants from third world countries, they bring third world voting habits and cultures. They vote for big government. They vote for the welfare state. So by cheering for open borders to get cheaper labor for Amazon and Walmart, because it's all about GDP and the economy to them, libertarians are importing the very socialism that they claim to hate. They are selling out their grandchildren's future so that the GDP can go up by half a percentage point. They prioritize the economy over the nation. But the economy is supposed to serve the family. The family is not supposed to be fuel for the economy. Now, I know a lot of libertarians are like, well, I don't support open borders. And that's fine if you don't. But they will also turn around in the same vein and say something like this. Well, the economy, you need to be more competitive than them. Well, you kind of can't. This is the reality of free market shit, by the way. A nation that cannot produce its own goods let's outsource everything to China. A nation that relies on Chinese slave labor for its steel and microchips, it's not a sovereign nation. I don't care if it's cheaper to buy plastic garbage from overseas. If it means the Rust Belt is completely destroyed and American men die of opioid addiction and unemployment, it's not worth it. It doesn't matter if the market's better. I am an economic nationalist because I care about the well-being of the American people, not the stock portfolio of whatever, right? So this blindness extends to the Second Amendment as well. I am a Second Amendment absolutist, but within the context of the Constitution. That's the difference. We have to be honest about who the Constitution was written for. It says it is for ourselves and our posterity. It was written for European men and women of that time period who were Christians and of high moral character. Libertarians will advocate for gun rights for anyone. It's absolutely insane. They'll fight for the right of a communist to own a rifle. They'll fight for the right of a violent revolutionary to arm himself. Dude, that's suicidal. It is too lawless. And then they'll be like, oh, you're a redcoat, you're a bootlicker. Like, if a group of people like communists or Islamists or leftist Antifa fucking dirtbags openly state that they want to destroy the Constitution and overthrow the nation, extending the constitutional protections to these insane people is a death wish. Like, get fucking real. They would rather the country burn down than be told, well, you're a hypocrite. Get real. The Constitution is not a magic spell. It is not a suicide pact. George Washington would look at a communist Muslim running amok in America in 2026 and he'd be like, what the fuck is that? He wouldn't say, well, he has a natural right to bear arms just like me. He would see an enemy combatant, actually. But our country has changed significantly since the 1700s. It has gotten too big, it's gotten too diverse, and it's gotten too divided as well. We have to interpret the Constitution through the lens of survival. If the government deems you an enemy, they will take your guns. That is true. Libertarians aren't wrong about the danger of the state, but the root cause is not explicitly state power. The root cause is who wields the state power. We need to stop pretending that a 2026 communist is a fellow citizen like the Constitution from the 1700s said. They are subversive. And in any sane society, the Communist Control Act would have been enforced 20 years ago already. In a perfect world, these people would be kicked out of the country because they hate America anyways. You can't build a free society with people who want to enslave you with their destructive ideology. But libertarians don't get this. They operate on this suicide pact logic where they would rather let the country be conquered by subversives than violate the principle of free speech for enemies of the state. But ultimately, and I mentioned this earlier, this brings us to the core philosophical failure of libertarianism. It's the rejection of hierarchy and the embrace of neutrality. They think everything is neutral. Libertarians claim the government should be neutral. They will say stuff like, live and let live. They say the state shouldn't promote Christianity, but it shouldn't promote atheism either. They think there is such a thing as a moral vacuum. And let me tell you right now, there is no such thing as a moral vacuum. If the state stops supporting Christian values, it doesn't become neutral, it becomes hostile. When you remove God from the public square, you don't get a blank slate. You just get a new religion. You get wokeism. That's the left's religion. You get the pride flag flying over American embassies. It's no longer a Christian nation because we wanted to get rid of it so bad. You get drag queen story hour in public libraries. Libertarians step aside and let this happen, though. They will say, well, it's a free country. If they want to read to kids in drag, that's their right. No, it isn't. That is degeneracy. That is a cultural conquest that is targeted at children. Libertarians are incapable of distinguishing between, air quote, liberty, which is the freedom to do good and to raise a family and to worship God, and, air quote, license, which is the freedom to do evil and to degrade yourself and to corrupt your community. They mix these terms together, liberty and license. Society needs direction, it needs hierarchy, it needs order. As a Christian and an American nationalist, I stand by the American virtues and I love liberty. It is what makes this country beautiful. But liberty without morality leads to the financial and the moral decay that we are all living through right now. Look around you. Politicians are selling out to corporate lobbying in AIPAC. That's gross. That's degenerate. That is betraying your own people for 30 pieces of silver. Sound familiar? Anyone read the Bible here before? You know, the rise of OnlyFans, that is degeneracy. It's like, oh, it's the free market, buddy. Just let them do what they want. No, actually, I don't think we should just let them do that. It's the commodification of intimacy and something that's very inherent to the soul. It's like, nope, they'll just sell your butthole for $5 online every month. There's stuff like hoflation, degeneracy. Rabid feminism destroying the family, degeneracy. All of this happened because we brought into the lie that there is no objective, air quote, good. We bought into the lie that everything is just a market choice. Libertarians look at a traditional family and a porn star and they're like, oh, these are two valid lifestyle choices. These are both the same. I see the bedrock of civilization and the cancer that kills it, actually. Society needs truth, and it needs to acknowledge that some things are true and some things are false. Some ways of living are healthy, and some are toxic. We need to return to traditionalism. We need to acknowledge that men and women are different, and that the family is the building block of the nation, and that the nation answers to God only. But libertarians deny natural hierarchy. They are egalitarians in denial. They think if you remove the government, everyone will magically get along, and they will all trade peacefully. They ignore reality. People are different. IQ distributions are different. Cultural temperaments are different, and a society requires authority. Someone has to be in charge. It doesn't matter if it's a group of one and one other guy, or if it's 10 people, or 100, or 1,000, a million. It doesn't matter. Someone has to be in charge. Leadership's important. And if the leadership is not a righteous Christian hierarchy, it will be a demonic globalist hierarchy, or ran by somebody else. Cough, cough, you know who. Libertarians live in a fantasy world where power doesn't exist. I miss the classical libertarians. those kinds of guys I fuck with. You know, at least their logic is coherent. You know, even if I disagree, at least they kind of make sense. These libertarians we have now are just like liberals because they're materialistic and they're egalitarian. That's pretty much it. That is why they are wolves in sheep's clothing. They side with liberals more than they do with us because at the end of the day, they are both materialists. They both agree that tradition is an obstacle to progress. They both agree that religion should be private and it should be weak. And they both agree that national borders are impediments to the global economy. Isn't it really funny how liberals are like that now? But anyways, the libertarian just clears the path for the leftist. That's why they're always fucking siding together. The libertarian destroys the old moral laws in the name of freedom, their idea of fucked up freedom. Then the leftists will just march in right through the open door to impose tyranny. That's it. We don't need more live and let live. We don't need more neutrality. We need a state that protects our borders and it punishes these disgusting vices and it rewards virtuous actions. And it puts the American family above the global GDP. We need a return to the values that actually built this country, like faith and blood and soil and honor. Anything less is just a slow death march. So, yeah, that's my problem with libertarianism. I'm sure somebody's going to disagree. And hey, that's fine. You may be different, but that's the thing with libertarians and the idea. It's very individualistic. So someone may be like, well, I don't believe that, but I'm a libertarian. Again, that's what I think the problem is. They're not working together as a coherent unit, which you would have under Christianity anyways. So, yeah, I'll say that I'm a far-right paleocon Christian nationalist. I don't know. I think I'm just the normal person now. I just follow the traditions that my ancestors and like pretty much the whole fucking world followed. Like, I want my country and my people to be the top dogs, but we live in a backwards world now. So, yeah. All right, guys, that's all from me today. God bless you and your families. I mean it when I say it. America first and America only. Jimmy Talks out.